Welcome to episode 41 of the Necronama.com. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now, and 6 days ago, I watched the craziest VHS tape.
And I am Don Guillory, author, historian, educator, co-host of this podcast. And I'm sure there are going to be people who are listening to this who have no idea what the hell a VHS is. As for all of us old people, makes me miss Blockbuster and wish it were to return somehow. But, you know.
Oh, these kids and their crazy laser discs. Joining us today is Michael David Wilson from the This Is Horror podcast. Michael, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm ready to rock and roll. Watched RINGU recently, and I know that we're going to be talking about that a lot today. And I'm living in Japan at the moment, so hopefully I've got some insider knowledge, and I can't wait to find out what it is that I have to go let you know.
So you were telling me that the other, like the sequels, are available there easily. Did you get to end up watching them or not? Or
yeah, so I got to watch the second one, so aptly titled RINGU 2, which gives you a little bit more information in terms of how Sadako came about and continues and expands the story. Now they've also got Raisin and RINGU 0 available. Now, I watched a little bit of those, but what I didn't realize was that they don't have English subtitles. And whilst I'm learning Japanese, my Japanese is probably not good enough quite yet to follow along to it only in Japanese. But I mean, they're available. And as my language progresses, I'll be able to watch all of them rather than just the original and the sequel. But I mean, interestingly enough, Raisin is based off the book Spiral, which is a direct sequel to Koji Suzuki's Ring, and they released it at the same time as the original Ringu.
Really?
But that one didn't. Yeah, really. So this is not something that I'm bullshitting. And I mean, at the time, it didn't take off too well, which was why they released the sequel, RINGU 2, and then that one did do well. So, I mean, Raisin is largely forgotten, but it is available and it is worth checking out if you want a kind of complete picture of the Ringu series. And I mean, I suppose while I'm dropping knowledge bombs on Ringu, there was also a straight to television adaptation of Ringu that I believe, I think it came out before the film. Either way, I watched it a number of years ago, and it's a much more faithful adaptation to the original Koji Suzuki text. But I mean, I think it's not really as good as the movie. So, I mean, I guess it's a similar case with like things like The Shining, the Kubrick version, and the television version. And whilst actually I think the television version is reasonable, I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Kubrick's.
Wow, I didn't even know that existed. That's interesting.
Yeah, it took me quite some time to track it down, but this was a few years ago when I was going on a J-horror binge, and yeah, I found that, and I mean, I'm not going to say that my life is necessarily better for having watched it, but that is an experience that I can now claim that I have.
Well, that's great. So I didn't mean to totally steer us away. Let me let you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a bit about This Is Horror and about your books.
Yeah, so I'm Michael David Wilson. I'm the host of This Is Horror podcast alongside my co-host Bob Pastorella. And we have released at the time of recording 340 episodes. So these are long, in-depth conversations with masters of horror. We've spoken to people like Stephen Graham Jones and Charlene Harris and Joe R. Lansdale, Adam Neville, Ramsey Campbell. And I mean, if you're interested in conversations with horror writers and horror creators and you haven't checked out This Is Horror podcast, then there's probably an episode for you. So, I mean, I'd recommend just finding the podcast on your favorite podcast app, searching for some of your favorite authors, and seeing as we've spoken with so many people within the genre, there's probably something that you're going to find that you're going to enjoy there. And I mean, it is geared towards writers and readers. And even though it's called the This Is Horror podcast, I would say that this is great for writers of all genres in terms of the writing lessons and the experiences that our guests tend to give us. And there are a lot of actionable takeaways, but at the same time, these are very personal interviews. So I'll often start by asking people about life lessons and their early childhood. So I would like to think that whether you're a writer, a reader, someone just interested in human experience, then, I mean, you will find something for you within those conversations. I mean, it's probably like Mick Garris's Post-Mortem crossed with the Tim Ferriss show, crossed with like any podcast on horror literature. So that is This Is Horror podcast. In terms of my own writing, in 10 days from the time of recording, so on April the 28th, The Girl in the Video will be coming out. So that is my debut novella. So me and the publisher have pitched it as The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. It is set in Japan. It is a techno horror. There is hopefully quite a bit of humor there as well. I mean, I certainly made myself laugh, so that's one person straight off the bat. And it's also very fast-paced. And I mean, so far, it is doing well. It has had some great advanced praise from the likes of Josh Malaman and David Moody and Alan Baxter, who I know was recently a guest on this very podcast.
We do love Alan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think everyone likes Alan. I mean, how can you not like an author that wrote The Roo, a story about a fucking mental kangaroo going around terrorizing people? I mean, if you don't like that, do you even like life? I mean, that's a question that I ask people every day. It can get some pretty weird responses, particularly if you're in the supermarket or something. It's like, just fucking take your groceries and fuck off, mate. And I mean, yeah, the Girl in the Video is something I would like you to check out. There will be an audio book, ebook, paperback, so whatever your desired method of consuming stories, it is there for you. And if you'd rather check out some of my work before parting with your cash, and I mean that's understandable, then there are a number of my stories that are available in podcast form on places like the No Sleep podcast and the Other Stories podcast and Missed Creations. And if you go to my website, www.michaeldavidwilson.co.uk, there are links to various stories. And I mean, most of the ones on the Other Stories, they're only about 20 minutes long. So if you want, put it on double speed. And if you didn't like it, you've only wasted 10 minutes of your time to see if my writing was for you. So I
love it.
That is me. Yeah. I mean, This Is Horror, as well as a podcast, it is a publisher. Perhaps the most famous book we put out was A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman.
Oh, I love
Closely
that.
followed by... Thank you. I'm glad. That would have been awkward if you'd have been like, oh, not that fucking book. So I do appreciate that you're a fan of that. I mean, yeah, Josh Malerman is such a talent. The other book that is pretty well known is The Visible Filth by Nathan Ballingrad. And that was in 6 months or so ago. It was made into a film called Wounds, which is available on Netflix. And I mean, you should check that out.
One of the things you were talking about with This Is Horror is how you go personal with people. And Danger Slater was on the show, and I love Danger Slater. And when he was talking about the gifts that his mom gets him every year, and I don't want to ruin it for people because I want them to go listen to your podcast, but like, it was such a crazy gift that he gets every single year from people. And it was such a nice thing because I follow Danger a lot. And, I haven't heard any other interviews where they talk about this. And I loved how you went there. Like, it gave such a background on who we're talking to and what they've been through or what their life is like and how that plays into writing. And that's one of the big strengths of your podcast that I truly love. And I just wanted to tell other people out there that they should check it out for that, if nothing else. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that episode with Danger Slater is pretty wild. It's pretty humorous. I mean, you would expect that with Danger Slater. I mean, if you went into it expecting like kind of just a very straight, formal conversation, then you probably haven't read Danger Slater. But
the guy writes a book about chopping off your arms, replacing them with tools, and digging to the center of the earth. I mean, really normal stuff. So
yeah.
I mean,
it might be with the current situation. It could be the best entertainment that you might find these days. But I mean, with Danger Slater and with that conversation, I mean, what I try to do is when I'm preparing for the podcast, I'll look through biographies, I'll look through interviews that the author has had with other people, and I'll try and find the most obscure details that maybe they've only mentioned once and no one really followed up on it. And it's like, right, we're going there, because I think when you're running an interview show, you don't really want to be asking the same kind of questions that everyone else is asking. And I mean, obviously, there are going to be a little bit of crossover that is inevitable. But I think particularly early doors, you want to come out with something that they haven't really spoken about before. And also just to set the tone of the conversation. It's like, well, this isn't going to be like your everyday, normal kind of horror podcast conversation. And I mean, these conversations we often split into two parts. And in many instances, you'll find that part one is just talking about the person and their life. And then part two is when we end up actually talking about the book. And I mean, as you may have ascertained from the start of this conversation, where before we even recorded, we spoke about a lot of topics from pro wrestling to politics to COVID-19, I can talk a lot and go off on a lot of tangents. So, I mean, on that basis, please do rein me in if you feel that is happening too much.
No, man, that's what I love about this. We get to know people. Like, it's one thing to interact with somebody on Twitter and get little pieces here and there, and it's another to like really get to know other people, and that's one of the things I love most about this show. So feel free.
All right,
Don, do you have any questions before we get into the film?
No, none at all. I was going to say, like, by all means, don't feel like you have to stop talking to get into the movie.
I wanted to be sure. I was like, oh man, I feel like I've just ignored Don for forever. I should probably check in, make sure he's alive.
No, that is called me listening and being attentive.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about there. I mean, periodically I am like, okay, Bob Pastorella, are you alive? Most of the time he responds, so he's not died on us yet, so
that's good.
Yeah, I mean that's what I think. And as a podcast, I mean, one thing I look for in a co-host is someone who's not gonna die mid-air. I mean that's just call me old-fashioned. That's just something that I prefer, though. I suppose if one of us did die during the podcast, it might be good for publicity. But I do like Bob. I as much as I like the ratings too, I don't like it that much. To go back to pro wrestling, which is something that we didn't record, so that's great for listeners. I don't have the Vince McMahon school of thought. I'm not going to actually want anything to happen purely for the ratings.
That's great. Don, I will not promise you that I will not die during the show, but if I do, if you could just market the hell out of that, that'd be great.
Do it in my blowing up Twitter with that. I'm like, hey, did you know that James died? I have like your time of death stamped like right on the podcast.
Skip ahead.
I've joked about it. It's going to be really fucking awkward if someone dies during this podcast.
It's foreshadowing. It's fine.
Yeah.
None of us watched the video, so I think we're safe, right?
Oh, I saw a video 6 days ago. It was great.
Anyway, you'll make it through this episode though, so you're fine.
There you go. That's all that matters. Big plans for the weekend. So, Michael, one of the things that I ask everybody who comes on here, we always let the guest pick the film that we talk about. Why did you pick this particular film? What is it about Ringu that you're like, it has to be this?
Well, I mean, firstly, I thought I better have a film that is in some way linked even tenuously to the girl in the video. So since this was one of the films that we'd picked out in comparing the girl in the video on the copy, I thought it would be a good choice. But I think more than that, I mean, Ringu was such a influential film in terms of the J-horror scene in the late 90s. And I mean, the success of it not only catapulted J-horror in terms of its popularity within the West, but it also led to a wave of other films within Japan, such as The Grudge and Dark Water and Pulse and One Missed Call. I mean, I could go on. It wouldn't make for a very interesting episode, though, if I just listed all of them. But, I mean, I think as well, it's a good film to contrast with the slashers that were coming out in America and in the UK at the time, because it's very much more psychological horror and very much understated. And I think because Ringu did so well in Japan and internationally, and at the same time or thereabouts, the Blair Witch Project did so well in the West, I think it did lead to more psychological and quiet horror. And I mean, I think that is a very good thing. And I think as well, there will be things that I might highlight during this conversation to kind of compare and contrast Ringu in Japan with the remake in the West. I mean, of course, to begin with, Ringu is more understated, more is left to the imagination and less is explained, whereas in the West there are more explanations as to how what is going on is happening and why. And I think that's just a difference in culture, really. And I thought as well that it was interesting to compare the music and the soundtrack. I mean, The Ring has a much more traditional soundtrack, I mean, what you hear is essentially music, but I think in Ringu, it's more ambience and weird soundscapes. And actually, in that respect, it has a lot in common with the video game Silent Hill, which was released a year later. So I do wonder if Silent Hill was influenced by Ringu or if actually it was being made at the same time. So it's just a happy coincidence. But I think another thing that Ringu does is it fuses together modern technology and these kind of techno fears with traditional tropes from Japanese stories and Japanese mythology. I mean, it's almost a tick box of that. You've got the water, you've got a well, you've got this long-haired woman whose face is obscured, and you've got her coming back to seek vengeance after she was wronged. And these are all things that you'll see time and time again in traditional Japanese short stories. And I think for all those reasons and a lot more, I mean, Ringu is something that we'll be able to talk about for a long time, and that has been influential and raised many questions that are still relevant today.
As he was saying that, I was thinking about how much, at least for the most part, how much mainstream audiences don't know about Asian, African, Middle Eastern folk tales, culture, things like that, to really understand what's taking place in these movies, or even looking for some of the fine details, because we're so Eurocentric and so Amerocentric with a lot of the stories. Because I think even with Parasite, the big complaint that people had about the movie was, well, I don't understand what's going on, blaming the subtitles and the blame. There were some cultural things, but there were some universal things. And I think that some of the not understanding some of the cultural things, which were small parts of the film, or at least small as far as needing to understand. Some people use that as an excuse to not understand the themes itself, or at least a lot of the great stuff that gets revealed in the movie or included in the movie. But yeah, it definitely makes me think about the way that American audiences, for the most part, look at foreign films, foreign horror especially, and don't fully appreciate what's taking place within the stories, or at least the history that's within those stories.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned Parasite, because I think not only did Ringu lead to this wave of J-horror films, but it also led to an interest in Asian films generally. And so Then we saw things such as Old Boy and the trilogy that came out of that from South Korea. And then more recently, we've seen the likes of Train to Busan. And I mean, I would actually say that in my personal opinion, South Korea are making better films than Japan on the whole. I mean, I think that definitely this J-horror wave in the late 90s and early noughties was a golden age of Japanese horror and Japanese genre films. But I do feel that these days, I mean, Japanese horror and genre films, they're a little bit hit and miss. And I mean, when they hit really hard and it's phenomenal. But I think South Korean films, just generally, the standard seems to be a little bit higher. And I even think from the cinematography that they're just putting more money into it. And I mean, South Korean films, if you're not watching them, you should definitely remedy that ASAP.
Oh, yeah. I actually just rewatched Train to Busan. We're going to be doing it on the show next week. And I've loved this film since it came out. I've probably seen it 9-10 times, and I'm not a person who rewatches movies a lot. So me saying that's a huge compliment coming from me. And what I really noticed this time with it was South Korea is really good, like you said, at leaving questions. and not answering everything. And they're also really, really good at emotion and it being absolutely universal. The little things in Parasite that, we may not have totally caught if we don't get the culture or whatever, it doesn't pull you out of the film.
Right.
It doesn't need it to get through. There's a lot of American films where if you didn't understand something, you're going to be like, what the hell just happened? Because it's so ingrained. And I really, Train to Busan could have been anywhere. And we're going to talk about this next week, so I don't want to say too much right now, but they are so aware of socioeconomic differences and how they affect every single level, not just the top and the bottom, not the haves and the have-nots, every single level along the way. And I noticed that in Parasite. I noticed it in this, and I think that that's what they're doing with every aspect, whether it's the cinematography, whether it's the storytelling. They're not just hitting the main notes. They are taking the time and layering the shit out of everything. And it's really paying off. And I agree, people need to be watching way more of these films.
And if I may, don't use subtitles as an excuse to not watch a film.
Oh, my God.
I think Parasite, it was advertised for Hulu the other day. And I forgot what we were watching. But my wife saw the preview and I was like, oh, shit, it's going to, Parasite's going to be on Hulu. I can't, I'll be glad to rewatch that. And then I heard something that turned me off from it, which was it was dubbed. It was being dubbed. And I'm sure you can listen to it with the original audio. But I think that having it dubbed takes so much away from the movie.
Wow.
But that took me out by having it dubbed, at least in the preview. Like, leave the movie the way it was. It was great. And I know I'm not an anime person, but I know there's a huge argument between anime fans about subs versus dubs. And I'm going to have to take the subtitle position on this one. Like, you lose so much by not hearing it in their own language and their own voices. And,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I always go for the subtitles. And I mean, I just can't watch it if it's dubbed. It's too jarring. There's too much of a disconnect. So it doesn't work for me. And I mean, as you say, you lose something. You lose some of the nuance and the delivery. And just also that cultural difference. And I mean, what's been interesting for me, because I do have some knowledge of the Japanese language, it's interesting having the subtitles on, because sometimes the translation is not quite what they actually said in Japanese. And I mean, I would say for people learning Japanese that I was actually coming back and rewatching this, pleasantly surprised by just how much I understood of Ringu in the Japanese. Because when I first watched it, I mean, of course, I didn't understand any of it. When I watched it again a few years ago, there were little bits here and there. But I mean, now I did understand probably a good 70 or so % of it. And it is relatively simple Japanese that they're using. I mean, the points where I got lost were when they're giving a kind of whole history of what's been going on. But for the most part, these are simple conversations. So, I mean, there's another reason to watch it for your Japanese language learning. So that's probably, 1% of the listenership right there?
No, I think for me, subtitles, I actually watching films with subtitles, and I haven't always felt this way, but it really helps with my attention deficit disorder, and I'm forced to pay attention more, and what I noticed with Parasite was that I suddenly didn't realize I was reading, probably halfway through the film, and I was like, I haven't felt like I was reading in a long time. I just adjusted to it, and it was just part of the process, And the more subtitled movies that I watch, the more that I find that's true. And I've even started turning subtitles on films in English because I miss things that are happening in the background, or I do just go get distracted by something, and it keeps me focused. So all I'm saying is give them a chance if you're not already.
Yeah, definitely. And who is it that you're chatting with about Train to Busan? Who is this person with exceptional taste?
He is a indie horror author named Michael Brent Collins.
Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with him. So he's someone else who we've had on the show before.
Oh, nice.
So.
I didn't know. I'm going to go look that episode up. That sounds great. I'm going to do it right now. I'll see you guys later. No.
do it right now. All right, and we're back. So it's been 2 hours. How did you find
it? Was a great episode.
Yeah. I mean, that one thing that he said, it was controversial, wasn't it? And at first I was like, oh, were you going to go there, Michael Brent? But he did, and he justified it.
So let's jump into this episode now. You're the guest. I'm going to let you lead the way. So just take us where you want to go.
Well, I mean, the start of the movie, we see these sea waves and water, and it's filmed in a very dark, blackish camera angle and camera lens, and it kind of has this nightmarish start to it. And I mean, you don't exactly know where you're going, but the tumultuous waves and the groaning and these ambient sound effects, I mean, it almost feels like there are echoes of George A. Romero in terms of the groaning. There's also a little bit of creaking, which brings to mind Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then I almost felt that there were nods to John Carpenter. So straight away, before you've even seen a character, before you've seen anything other than an intro sequence, you have this feeling of uncomfortableness, and there's a great foreboding, and you know straight away that you're watching a horror film. And it does put you at unease. And I thought, if ever there's a way that you want to start to set the tone, it's that right there. And as soon as we see the characters, there's an immediate hook. So there's no messing around. We see a baseball game on television, and then a girl talking to her friend about this video that will become very important. And it's about a woman who appears on the screen, and there's some bizarre things that occur within this video. And then the phone rings after you've watched it, and a week later you die. And that is pretty much the beginning that we've got. But then in terms of the friend, she's kind of bluffing with her friend. And did she watch the video? Did she not watch the video? At moment she's like, yeah, I watched it. And then she's like, no, I'm just pulling your leg. I'm just fucking about. And we have the phone ring a number of times as well. And in one instance, it's just the mother. But I mean, we're never quite sure if the friend watched the video or if she didn't watch the video, and they're constantly toying. And I would say that the sound of the telephone, it's almost iconic now in foreboding, and we probably all got a little bit scared of telephones ringing after Scream. So I do wonder if that played a part in Ringu, because I mean, Japanese horror has taken influence from the West before, so it's no coincidence that there are nods to people like Romero and Carpenter and Craven. But of course, we then find out that the friend did see the video, and then it all goes to shit. And the kind of main, the main premise of the film is this reporter investigating the video and trying to find out, why are all these people dying? Is there a way that we can stop them dying? And that is the film. That is the opening, and then where we're going from there.
I absolutely love this opening. I didn't see this when it first came out, so I knew a lot going in, and it was the ringing telephone that really got to me. The first time it rings, I'm expecting that to be the call that does this. But no, it's just tension building. And it's so incredibly well done. Everything about this opening scene works for me and made me enjoy the movie even more. Don, how did you feel about the opening?
I liked it. And here's what was, I guess, took me out of the beginning of the film. And it's nothing that they did. It was just the fact that this movie came out in 1998, and I was trying to put myself back into where I was in 98. Of course, seeing the technology, and for me, I was trying to process this and think about, how was somebody going to see this movie in, the 21st century, or 2020 beyond. How are they going to see it? Because there's going to be so many things that may work, might not work for them. Because my generation, our generation, we look at the phone and kind of like, yeah, I still fucking get that part. That makes sense to me, as far as not answering the phone or being concerned that something's going to come up. Because the tension that gets built in the beginning of that film is all about, from the previews what the film is about, what's going to take place, how people are dying. But that tension that's drawn up with those first few scenes, and then it kind of pulls you out of it, because now you have the friends watching there's a baseball game on TV. They're, doing their friendly bullshit, and then, trying to scare each other with the story. And then it pulls you back from that moment of kind of comfort to discomfort with that phone ringing. And all I'm thinking is, like, that was a great way to get you hooked in. It hooks you in by making you giving you some discomfort, relaxing you, then bringing that discomfort back, and, almost like waves crashing, bringing you back. And then that phone rings and you're just thinking, like, oh shit, this is going to be that moment. And then it doesn't happen. So you're just sitting there thinking, like, okay, well, I'm not going for this predictable stuff that typically happens with a lot of American horror movies. So I like the way that they kind of, they knock you off kilter a little bit, or take you out of balance, with the way it gets set up.
The next scene, we cut to 3 schoolgirls who are friends of Tomoko. So Tomoko is the girl who passed away. And I guess I should backtrack and say the end of that first scene is seeing Tomoko's face. And it's kind of twisted and contorted. Right. And you know that she's seen something. And at that point, we don't know what she's seen, and that kind of look of terror that everyone has after dying. I mean, that is iconic, and that's the kind of thing you hear about in urban legends. So scene 2, we've got 3 schoolgirls talking about it, and they're being interviewed by newspaper reporter Reiko, and Reiko is the protagonist of the story. And at this point, we're just finding little bits of information out. We're trying to investigate what's going on as much as Reiko is. So we know that something has happened in the Izu Peninsula, but we don't know exactly what that was. And so, I mean, Reiko gets her assistant to, have a look at that location, have a look at the cabin that Tomoko and some of her friends were staying at, because this could be pivotal. So we've got a nice little introduction. And the fact that different people are talking about it, I mean, already this has become an urban legend. It's like, well, you see the video, you have 7 days, and you die. And pretty soon after that, we're introduced to Reiko's son, Yoichi. And I mean, it's interesting to see the commentary on Ringu, because I think that there's an argument as to whether Yoichi is or isn't abused as a result of neglect. Because, I mean, his mother, Reiko, is very independent. And I mean, I think that's an important theme as well. She's a very headstrong woman, but at the same time, she's got a son to care for, and she's pretty absent. And his stepfather is also not so great. I mean, there's literally one point where Yoichi is walking home in the rain. He bumps into his father. They kind of just nod at each other and off the fuck.
They go about their ways.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what is important cultural context, though, is that in Japan, I mean, even today, young children are a lot more independent than in the West. I mean, it is not that unusual to see children who are 6 or 7 years old walking to school on their own. And when I first saw that, you know, I thought, what the fuck? Like, no way would I do that. And I mean, my daughter will be going to school in Japan. I mean, she's only 2 at the moment, but when it comes to it, she will be going to school. And I don't care if it's culturally accepted that at 7 years old you make your own way to school. That isn't gonna happen with my daughter. You know, she's a little bit embarrassed. Maybe I'll walk at a distance, but I'm not. Yeah, you got to kind of get the balance right there. You don't want to look like who's this fucking weirdo following children, but
peeking behind trees.
yeah. I mean, if you're hiding behind trees, that's probably not the way to do it, especially if you're dressed like a tree as well. But that would be something entirely different. But yeah, I think it is important to note that these things that are shocking to us as Western viewers are not that uncommon. There is a greater sense of independence from an earlier age. But I mean, that said, she probably isn't quite getting the balance right as much as she should, but it's probably not as shocking as we think it is. And I mean, on that subject, she does pretty soon confide in her ex-husband about what's going on. So this is Ryuji Takayama. He's a professor at a local university, and they buddy up to investigate and to see what's happening with this tape. And I mean, it seems like for a long time you get the impression that they've been distant, but there's almost this tape and this investigation is uniting them. But I mean, a difference between Ringu and the remake, The Ring, is that the American version tries to almost add this sexual tension and this romance between them, but that there's none of that here. It is just business as usual. They're going to sort out the tape and that's that. And I think, I mean, you do often see with a lot of Western films that they try to add a romantic element to things, but yeah, it just was not needed in the Japanese version. And I mean, I guess it's up to personal interpretation which one makes for a better film on that particular point.
I mean, I hate that America does this. We do it to a lot of films. We add this sub story that we think needs to be there. And I don't know, like, I'm not in a lot of other countries going to films, but I feel like we try so hard to mainstream any movie so that it can make as much money as possible, you know? And so it becomes this thing where everything gets watered down and things are very similar because, oh, that's worked before. And it's like, hey, you could do something different and that might also make money. And so I feel like they insert these pieces of story that don't need to be in stuff just because that's how they've always done it.
Yeah.
The standards have been, add the romance, and then also you have to have that happy ending, which not needed.
And make sure you explain everything so that people know what they just saw.
Yeah.
Because, we couldn't be bothered to think for ourselves.
Yeah. And I'm really not a fan of the kind of neatly wrapped up happy end to a story because, it's not really realistic. Every story is a tragedy if you follow it far enough. And I think the way in which the world works out, it's painted in these shades of grey. Sometimes it's a fucking rainbow. It's not black and white. It's not right and wrong and good and bad. There's all this nuance. And so when we're giving people a film, we're giving them an inauthentic experience. And obviously, I'm not saying that everything has to be real. I'm not saying that, well, in real life, women climb out of television sets or shit like that. But I think we can have these fantastical elements and these weird fiction elements, but we can also have something that feels like it could be believable and could be authentic to life. And I think that is the distinction. And so particularly if I'm watching a horror film, I want there to be that moment of unease at the end to wonder if it really is all over. If it's Silent Hill, let's just have that little crackle of radio static right when we think everything's okay. Or even in the old slasher films, as corny as they are, to even have a hand rise up from the grave, at least it fucking gave you something. And I think, to just say it's happily ever after, it's like, but it's not. That's not life.
Definitely. Well, and horror works so much better with questions. Because if you can answer everything, it's not scary anymore. Your brain can make sense of it. You can move on. Right? When there's questions, any little question that's left, any little fear that's still unexplained, that eats at your brain. Whether you're actively thinking about it or not, your brain keeps working on it every now and then. And it'll always be triggered by things. And that's where the power of horror comes from for me. So as much as I like explanations on some level, I don't want everything answered. I want to keep some questions. I want to keep some scares.
Yeah. And I think the Japanese version certainly does a better job of not giving you those answers. And the first time that I saw Ringu, I thought it was a great film. It left me feeling very scared. It had exactly the desired effect that it was supposed to. Oddly enough, a couple of years ago, I rewatched it, and on that viewing, I did actually find it a little bit slow, and it wasn't as effective as I'd remembered it being. But I think perhaps I'd almost filled in the gaps and made it an on-screen scarier experience than it was. But then oddly enough, rewatching it for this podcast, it was like, no, this is perfect. So it's been a roller coaster of emotions for me just watching it. But I think it does show how kind of expectations can come into this thing. And it might be the second time that I watched it, I just wasn't in the right frame of mind. But this time I thought the pacing is absolutely masterful. I don't think we have scene that isn't needed. And as I said, the first scene jumps into it after we've seen the reporter Reiko. We then see her and her son and the rest of the family at the funeral of Tomoko. And then we also see Yoichi kind of wandering around upstairs, going into the room of Tomoko's. And I mean, that there's something about him that almost hints that he could be a kid that is affected by this, but we're never quite told. It's just a suggestion, and I feel in lesser hands it would get a little bit cliched. They'd say, okay, the kid is definitely possessed, and it wouldn't be as effective. It would not really work for that particular movie. Now, I will say that if you want to know more about Yoichi and how he's affected, watch Ringu 2. But for this particular one, just hinting at it was what was needed. Otherwise, you'd be packing too much into the story and borderline cliche, I think.
I've never seen the Ringu 2, so I kind of want to based off of what you just said right there.
All right, there you go. Advertising other films.
Woohoo!
So then after that, we get to the cabin and Reiko watches the video, the famous video. And so this is the first viewing, and this is actually only 27 minutes into the film. So we are getting this pretty early. And I think what is great about this is the video seems pretty obscure. I mean, at first it seems like a seemingly a montage of disconnected video clips, but as we progress, we see the video a number of times. Sometimes we get to see a little bit more of it. Sometimes we're given more of an explanation as to how and why different parts of the video are in the video. And I think in terms of a masterclass in suspense and teasing details, this is it right here. And of course, after Reiko has seen the video, the phone rings. So we now know that she has a week. So you've got this ticking time bomb, which you always want in your fiction and in your movies. So it is a race. She has to either find out how to survive this tape or she's gone.
And you know what's that I kind of question about this film, which it's great that you have the journalist and you have the professor that are now investigating, like, how do we, let's get down to finding out what this is about and possibly how you can stop it. And you kind of question how many people have tried this before, or at least were, or just didn't take it serious enough compared to people who might have tried and still met their 7-day demise or demise after 7 days, not figuring out, what needs to be done or at least giving a shit enough to find it out. Because I think for some people, if they knew, hey, you've got these 7 days, I started writing down, I'm like, well, what would a normal person, quote unquote, do if you're told, or if you hear this story, you watch the video and you hear that same shit about 7 days and you take it seriously? Like, what would your plan be? What would you do that wouldn't involve like finding out the source of this video? Would you just go ahead and say, screw it, I got 7 days, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z? What do you guys think?
I think that the fact that the Japanese audience just goes along with the fact that there are 7 days and if it's not solved, that's it, you're dead, is very Japanese, like particularly in terms of the folklore and the folk tales. I mean, everything in Japan, it's almost mathematical, it's neat, it's solvable. So when you look at the folklore, something always happens unless you do something else. It's not now you've watched the video, you're gonna fucking die. There's always a way out of it. And actually, the original novel was based off a folk tale that was obviously adapted and expanded because, you know, back in those days there weren't videotapes, so that would have been a non-starter. But I kind of feel that in the West, if you were told that, you'd call bullshit on it. It's like, oh, you've watched this video, now you're gonna die. It's like, well, no, I'm fucking not. It's a videotape. What the fuck are you on about? So I think it's easier that it's in Japan, because I think if it was in the UK, particularly if you had an atheist or an agnostic, you probably have to have a couple of days of them saying, no, this is bollocks. This isn't what's going to happen at all. So you'd have that denial phase, but that's not a phase that we get in Ringu because that's not really part of the culture. But I do think, okay, if you start thinking, no, I really do need to take this seriously and there are other people dying, I mean, you're always going to have, however skeptical you are, that question of, yeah, but what if? So I think you would start trying to track down the tape in much the way that they do. And I think it might be her husband, her ex-husband, Ryuji, who finds that there is a message that is written in the tape, but it's in a kind of strange dialect that is unique to Izu Oshima Island. And so then that leads them to there. So as much as it's a horror movie, it's almost a detective movie.
Right.
And I mean, it's important to note as well that then shortly after that, Reiko sees her son watching the tape. And so, I mean, you could say that this is showing that kind of balance between motherhood, independence, and neglect. And, well, she's kind of failed with that one. And I mean, that's a weird moment as well, because it's like, so imagine you genuinely believe that this tape can fucking kill people. Why are you leaving it about so that your son can get it? I mean, he's not even that tall. Put it on a high shelf. That bit is maybe a little bit too convenient, the way that it's told in the movie. I feel know. That would... Go on.
I was going to say, I don't know, because for an American audience, I mean, people leave guns around all the time, and their kids pick them up and you know, have an accident, which, you know, I don't even like using the phrase accident, because if you happen to have a gun and you leave it out, you're negligent and it's not an accident. But yeah, so for me, I looked at that as, I could see it happening because, yeah, she does have that independent part of her. She has that motherhood part of her. And it seems like the two collided, and it's like, oh, well, I was thinking about my son's going to pick up this video and watch it. And, oh, shit, he just watched it. Now I'm more invested in making sure that we find out what's going on with this tape, because if I die, no big deal. But if he dies, I really fucked up.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting too that she asked why he watched it, and he says because Tomoko told him to. So, I mean, that is the hint that perhaps this son is kind of meeting with supernatural beings, right. And so perhaps that's why he was in Tomoko's room as well. And again, this is just widely accepted. I mean, it's interesting that Japan generally isn't a deeply religious society, but there is Shintoism and there is a kind of spirituality. So the fact that he apparently had a conversation with the ghost Tomoko, again, isn't investigated, whereas I feel for a Western audience. I mean, if my daughter said she was speaking to ghosts, I'd be like, okay, we need to fucking talk about this. This is not something where it's like, oh, Tomoko was about again. Fair enough. That happens.
You know, I'd never really thought about how easily he gets it. Now I kind of wish there was a scene where he had to work to get it off of a top shelf. Like something that kind of showed that he really is being pushed by something else to get this thing.
Right.
You know, I think that would really, I don't think that it detracts in any way as it is. It's a little weird, but I think it would really add some tension and just add that little bit of, I don't know, something extra, so to say. So.
Yeah. What about both of you? I mean, if you watch this video, what would your next steps be? Would there be some sort of denial? Would you be like straight away like, oh shit, I'm gonna die? Like, what would you do?
Well, I'm gonna jump in before James before he tells on me, because I know what Don would do. If I watched the video, my first thought would be, where the fuck did this VCR come from? But if I watched the video, and I got the phone call, my first reaction would probably be, get the fuck out of here. I'm not dying because of some goddamn video. Get the fuck out of here. And then it would creep into my mind, like after a day, like maybe this shit is for real. And I probably would spend a few days trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And then if I made it to that 7th day, I might just do some crazy shit. Just because I'm like, well, if it's not there, I die. If I'm sorry, if this thing is true, I die. If not, hey, I can plead insanity for all the shit that I've just done.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of when people get like a terminal illness diagnosis, and then they go and spend all the money and do a load of insane things. And then they find out, actually, you're not going to die. And then quite often, instead of being glad about the fact that they weren't going to die, they try and sue the people who told them. It's like, this is a fucking happy day. Like, I mean, I am quite a fan of being alive. So there's a podcast exclusive. So, I mean, if someone said, so you can be alive, but you lose all of your money, or you can be dead and have spend that money in 7 days. Like, I'm gonna go for the being alive part. And also, I mean, that person in this situation has got the jackpot because they managed to spend all their money and have a really fucking awesome 7 days, and they're not dead. It's a win-win.
That is definitely true. I'm going to go with the extremely American answer. I would not believe in this in the slightest bit. I would probably watch the video on purpose to prove that this is bullshit. And then I wouldn't think about it again. I'd be like, that was stupid. And on day 7, I would answer the phone and,
Yeah. And this is why it's a Japanese horror story, because that just wouldn't be, I don't know, that would kind of be like a film that starts off like a horror film, then turns into The Hangover, then ends as a horror film, which would just be a little bit odd. Now, I kind of respect someone for pulling that off, and I am a fan of films that decide to change genre halfway through. I mean, if you look at the film Kill List, it practically starts off as a soap opera, and then it turns into this kind of dark horror-y film, and by the end of the fucking thing, it's The Wicker Man. And equally, there's that film Miracle Mile that almost starts off like a rom-com, and then by the end of it, it's an apocalyptic movie. I am a fan of that kind of thing, but even the kind of Ringu hangover, Ringu sandwich might be taking it a little bit too far. And I mean, there's a number of films that go in a different direction to the one that you wanted. it to go in. And the reality is, what you wanted just isn't what the director wanted. I mean, for example, relatively recently, Jordan Peele's Us, I would have much preferred if we'd have stayed with the family and learned a lot more about them as a unit and had some kind of social commentary in that way. But instead, it turned more into The Purge meets a slasher film. And of course, there was a lot of social commentary. I mean, even in the name, Us, US, pitting us against them, there is a lot to love about it. But I don't know, I just felt that family unit themselves were so ripe for a story really going into their dynamics that it just didn't go in the direction that I wanted it to, even though I can see what Jordan Peele was doing and recognize it as a good film, even though it's not quite as good as Get Out, in my opinion.
I definitely agree with that. I think that while Us is a pretty good film, and while I enjoyed it, I definitely don't think it's as good as Get Out. I think Get Out is an absolute masterpiece, and I feel like Us almost tried to do too much. Like you said, they got away from the family, and they didn't concentrate on them, and they went all these other directions, and they made it this very large, crazy thing that's happening, when I think that the story, like you said, is with the family, and I, for one, would have definitely enjoyed that more. And I think you could still do the reveal at the end, and you could still do the big scenes, and they would still have that impact. But I think they would actually have more impact if we were following the family, and then it blew up into this larger thing. Sometimes family characterization is the power behind everything, and I believe you were about to talk about that.
Okay, so after the timer has been set, then we get that scene that I referenced earlier where the son is walking home in the rain and he sees his dad, and they just fucking look at each other and then go on. So I mean, that is a great way that you can in 10 seconds sum up the absent father role. And so that kind of happens, and then really we're off to the races with Reiko and Ryuji going to Oshima to discover what the hell has been going on. And I mean, in terms of the son, he is at the grandfather's house, so they're not that negligent. They're not like, listen, you're 6 years old, be the man of the house now.
Yeah,
we're leaving you
for the weekend.
Yeah, it's like you seem trustworthy. Like, you only watch a video that will ultimately kill you in 7 days. I think you can handle yourself. And if not, you're gonna die in 7 days anyway. If you die in 4 because we left you here, shit happens. That's not probably what they say, but it's implied, isn't it, in the way that it's filmed.
I was going to say that's probably what they were thinking. They're like, man, he's screwed anyway. There's no points. Yeah. We'll just move on.
Yeah, in the American version, they strongly considered actually just having a thought bubble with that. That's not what happened for anyone. Anyone in doubt? Oh, fucking hell, did they? No, not even in America did that happen. But yeah, they wind up going to the island and looking into what has been going on, and pretty soon they learn about this ESP, which a psychic by the name of Shizuko Yamamura has had, and she had these like great psychic abilities, and she was investigated in terms of attracting like a lot of media attention, and became quite popular. And she was of particular interest to a guy called Dr. Ikuma, who almost kind of like fostered that ability and got the media involved, and like was conducting these experiments to showcase her ability. But during one of these demonstrations, there's a journalist in the crowd who says in Japanese and more eloquently, "This is a load of fucking shit. This is bollocks. She's an absolute fraud." And then the entire audience of other journalists, they turn against Shizuko. And while they're getting angry, one of the journalists, the one in fact who started all this, he just drops dead, and then his face is contorted in fear in much the same way that everyone who saw the video died. And for a moment, we believe that it was Shizuko who did that, but then it is actually revealed that her daughter, by the name of Sadako, was the one who was responsible. So as powerful a psychic as Shizuko is, Sadako has much stronger abilities, and so she is the one who has killed this journalist as a result of him, mocking her mother. She's like, speak shit to my mum, that's what you get.
You know how many times that I kind of had those same thoughts as a kid, where somebody would, they're saying something about your mom or whatever. Like, I was just waiting for that moment where I'm going to fucking kill you with my brain.
Yeah, it's like, as much as I concentrated, nobody died. It just was like, Michael, are you constipated? Why are you looking like that?
Can you imagine if somebody did die while you were doing that? Like, that would mess with you forever.
Yeah.
No, you just try it again.
I was going to say, I feel that if it happened, you'd have to try it again. And like, particularly if you don't even believe in that kind of thing, it's like, well, maybe third time's the charm. Like, I don't know. If that was me, how many people would I have to kill to actually have that connection? I mean, probably quite a lot. But yeah, as a result of that, we find out that Sadako's mother killed herself, and Dr. Ikuma is fired, and Sadako is taken away. And I mean, we find this out a little bit later, but it is revealed that Dr. Ikuma is the father of Sadako. So he was in a relationship with Shizuko. And I mean, as we will shortly find out, the way in which he treats his daughter, I mean, he's not going to get Father of the Year, that is for sure.
I don't think anyone in this film's getting that.
No, I mean, no one is getting any sort of parent award at this point. But I think we're getting to the point, really, where we're told that, I guess, like, I'm jumping around a little bit with this timeline, because there are moments where she kind of realizes the doctor is in on this, because she recognizes the mirror in the video. Okay, that's the same one as in the doctor's house. And at first, when she talks to him about Sadako, he's very standoffish and aggressive, and he's shouting that there was no daughter. So it does take a little bit of time. But then when Reiko actually like touches his hand or his arm or something, she then sees these flashbacks of what happened, and that's how this is all revealed. And then pretty soon it's ascertained that the video is almost the physical form of all of Sadako's hatred.
Right.
And the way in which these people made her feel is channeled into that video. So if you see the video, that hatred puts a curse on you, and then you're gonna die.
But no,
Yeah,
I like the whole idea of at least the way that it becomes concentrated. I don't even want to say concentrated evil, but concentrated hatred or animosity, where Sadako has been rejected by society. At least by that estimation, she's been rejected. She's alone. Her own father throws her into the well. You've got all these things that she. It's almost as if she's reaching out to let someone know about her pain through the video and how she suffered, and wants that truth to be out there. But that's not the thing that's going to, even release the curse from the video. The curse can't be released. Right.
Yeah. And I think you're right in that, she almost wants someone to give a fuck and to care about what has happened and to unveil the actual trauma, because, during her life, nobody gave a shit about her. I mean, I think it's okay to actually, at this point, jump into what has happened, because I think we're getting to that point anyway. I mean, there's a scene where they go to another island and they take a boat and there's a storm, but really what we're getting towards is this reveal. And I mean, what actually happened was Dr. Ikuma, who you'll remember is her own fucking father, smashed her over the head and threw her down this well. But it was then revealed that she was still alive. She didn't die. And I mean, at this point that there is definitely an element of the supernatural, because we then find that not only was she still alive, but she lived down that well for a number of years. I think they say 30 years. So then okay, Sadako is not strictly human. And at the point where we find out that her father attacked and left her for dead, we also see the ex of Reiko getting very angry at her, and then he actually hits her in the face. So there's there's domestic violence on both ends. And I mean, unfortunately, at the time in Japan, that kind of domestic violence was more commonplace and less shocking. I mean, I think we are meant to be shocked by it. It obviously isn't a normal way to behave, but it was more prevalent then than it was in the West. And I think we're definitely meant to see that juxtaposition between Ikuma and the stepfather.
Right.
And certainly for me, I mean, it's like, okay, you've really fucked up that character who up until that point he wasn't exactly likable, but he wasn't totally dislikable either. And you find yourself in a strange situation, kind of like being in a Nathan Ballingrad story, where you now have to root for the lesser of a load of pieces of shit. It's like I've got to support the one who's a little bit less of a piece of shit, but nonetheless still a piece of shit than the other superior pieces of shit.
I mean, I feel like that's just the world in general these days.
Yeah. I think that there is an argument for that. It is a situation in which people may find themselves in, and in a way goes back to the point that the world is painted in shades of grey. I mean, the biggest pieces of shit do sometimes have some qualities that are okay about them. You know, Hitler liked dogs. That doesn't make up for what else he did, but that was like, okay, I can empathize with liking dogs. And equally, you'll find people who seem to be great people, and they've got amazing morals, and you aspire in most aspects to be like them, but of course they're gonna lose their temper. They're gonna have times when they're less than perfect, because that is the human condition. You know, none of us are perfect. It's just some of us don't throw our fucking daughters down a well.
Right.
That should be a shirt right there.
Yeah.
None of us are perfect, but at least we don't throw our daughters down the well.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but when they go to that one fishing or that one island, didn't they blame like something like the volcano? There was something, and I might be mixing movies together. Didn't they blame some tragedy on a girl or on a woman?
Yeah, like because there is as part of the video, there is an eruption. There is a volcano eruption. When they slow down the video, that is part of the message. But I mean, I think it might actually be to make it super awkward for people who can't speak Japanese. I think they show the kanji for volcano eruption, so the Japanese language script, but I don't think they translate it for the English audience. So it's kind of a fundamental part missing. But yeah, there is that. And then they also talk about a woman throwing herself in the volcano.
Right. I couldn't remember if it was volcano or an earthquake.
Yeah. That might be. I'd have to watch it again. That might be how the mother commits suicide. I mean, that's fucking brutal.
Jeez, yeah. There's got to be a better route than that.
Yeah, you certainly hope so. I mean, I suppose it's one way to make sure you get the job done.
Yeah, but there's like a lot of violence towards women in this movie, which, you know, I made notes as far as like the way it gets perceived. But how does that play within Japanese mythology or folk tales? You know, is that a common thing as far as from your experience?
I mean, in terms of the traditional tales, there are a lot of tales where essentially the template is a woman was wronged in life and now she comes back from the dead to seek vengeance upon those who wronged her. I mean, that is so many Japanese tales. I think as well, watching more Japanese modern films, particularly 90s, noughties era, there is more casual violence towards women that is almost just not explained or to a point accepted. And of course, that is hugely problematic, but it just happens, and there's no real wider commentary on it. I suppose in the folklore, the redeeming aspect is the fact that the woman was wronged, but then she comes back and seeks her vengeance. So, and I think probably because that is happening within RINGU, that kind of makes it a better situation. And let's also remember that the ex-husband who did that to Reiko falls victim. He dies, so there is a consequence, whereas Reiko is the only survivor. And on the note of being the only survivor, it's interesting how in the American version, the main protagonist almost becomes a final girl. There are hints of that kind of slasher trope, but I feel that it's not really something that we see in the original. She's not presented in that way. And I wonder as well, I wonder how it would have played out if the couple were both men. I mean, would anything have been different? I think you could probably remake the Japanese version and have both as men and have it not be too different. I suppose the distinction is that, like, Reiko has suffered violence and mistreatment, and so has Sadako. So in that way, there's a kinship. What else is strange is I'd almost say that Reiko is more maternal and more protective of Sadako than she is her own son.
She definitely is more interested and invested in Sadako, and it doesn't seem like it's about stopping the curse. It's almost like finding out what the hell happened to her. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. I wonder if that is, because of gender, but perhaps as well with Koichi being male, perhaps she feels that she doesn't need to be as protective to him, that he can fend for himself more, or that she knows that societally he's going to face less shit. I mean, this is all just kind of conjecture and speculation at this point, but I mean, a lot of good movies have that, they lead to more questions and speculation. It again goes back to not having a happy, neatly wrapped up ending. If you have that, there's no point discussing it. There's no point watching it again.
In that sense, that the questions are perfect. I mean, at least leaving you with questions is a perfect way, because not just our conversation, but at least the conversations for, multitudes of people who watch the film and question what took place, what takes place after the credits roll, what other avenues the story could have gone down. There's a lot there, and that's kind of one of the other strengths of this film, just like with a lot of other ones that do this. It makes you go beyond the 90 minutes or 2 hours that you would have watched a film and start to process all these different scenarios.
Yeah, I think as well, in a sense, when you have a film end like that, there's almost a choose your own adventure for the ending. You can decide what happened after the credits. How did it play out? And I mean, we'll be getting to that very shortly because we're so close to the ending now. And of course, they do go to the well. I mean, it was inevitable that had to happen. And then,
really fast before we get to the well, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So you were talking earlier about like how 6-year-olds walk themselves to school and stuff like that. Is there any difference with that with gender? Like, would it make a difference that it's a boy, for instance, so then she would see her son in a different way, like you were just talking about?
No, I mean, all genders walk to school. This is a universal thing that happens. But what I also find insane and heartbreaking is if you look at fatalities and traffic accidents, I believe the number one category are children in that fucking age bracket. And it's like, come on, something needs to be done. And I would say as well that at zebra crossings, a lot of people just don't stop. And I remember when I first came to Japan and I asked someone, like, so with the zebra crossing, are cars meant to stop at it? And she said yes. And I said, well, often they don't. Because in the UK, I'd be a little bit cocky and be like, right, I know the highway code, you're meant to stop. And I just like walk out and know that they'd have to use their brakes. I mean, obviously, I was very confident that they had good brakes. It was perhaps, in retrospect, a bad idea. But sure enough, they would brake and I would cross the road and be like, yeah, I know the rules. But in Japan, like, they won't even attempt to stop. And but legally they're meant to. So it's bizarre, but surely if you see the most fatalities are the age are like, I can't remember the exact bracket, but let's say 6 years old to 12. Those are the highest fatalities, and we're letting them walk to school on their own. Don't you fucking think something might need to be done here? So why don't we double up? Why don't we not only have them not walk to school on their own, but we could reinforce stopping at a zebra crossing, or we could make these traffic light controlled, which cars do obey. And this is what was so weird about the zebra crossing, because in nearly everything else, the Japanese are incredibly compliant, to the point where if there are traffic lights, then they're on red, but it's a really small road and you're a pedestrian and there are no cars, everyone would just stop and wait. But in the UK, jaywalking, as it is known, that is not illegal. So it's a weird situation. And I mean, for me, it's like, well, there are literally no cars in either direction. My natural inclination would be to cross the road at this point. Right. But if you've got like a load of other people waiting, it's like, oh, if I cross the road, I'm going to look like the dick. I'm going to give foreigners in Japan a bad name, so I better wait as well. I mean, little bit like waiting for Godot, really. You're waiting for something for absolutely no point as well. So there's a late game reference for the Samuel Beckett fans in the house.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, like, you know, if it had mattered with gender, like maybe that was why she cared more than she does for her son, you know. But yeah, if it's just the same, that really blows my theory out of the waters. So anyway, yeah. So you were taking us to the well before I interrupted and sent us down there. So. Yeah, like a kind podcaster, I just take people to the well, and that's where we're going. And that's right.
I mean, it's poetic for the story arc that, to begin with, it is the step-husband who's going down the well, but then for one reason or another, it's like, look, only Reiko can properly go down. I believe it was something to do with the weight and the way in which they were lowered, and Reiko was not going to be strong enough to pull her husband back up the well. So Reiko has to go down, and inevitably she finds the skull of Sadako and her whole body, in fact. And so at that point, they feel like, okay, we've solved it. We're free. This is the end. And it's also past 7:10, which was the time that Reiko had viewed the tape. And she's not dead. So case closed, and off home they go in time for some dinner. And it all looks like it's going to be a happy ending. But then we're with the step-husband, we're with Ryuji, I think it's pronounced. And he finds that his TV turns on. Uh-oh, that doesn't seem like a good sign. That wasn't supposed to happen. And then he sees the well. That was definitely not meant to happen. And then Sadako is getting out of the fucking well, which was also not meant to happen. And then she's getting out of the well and climbing out of the TV into his room. And she's going towards him. She's scrambling on the floor. And then we see her singular eye, which is what everyone must see before they die in terror. And inevitably, he dies. And I think the reveal of the eye is extremely effective in the Japanese version.
Yes.
Because everything's been understated up until that point. But in the Western version, because things have been a little bit more dramatic, we didn't actually need to see that. And it perhaps detracts from it a little bit.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah. You know, the Western version has so many jump scares and so much loud music and everything else. Like you said, like comparatively, Ringu is so much more gentle. And that's why this scene works so well. Because we finally get this crazy over the top holy shit moment. And it's totally lost in the Western version, like you said. Yeah.
Which then we fast forward to the next scene. Reiko has found out that her ex-husband has died. In keeping with character, doesn't seem hugely emotionally distraught about it, but, you know, she does have a big question, which is, why was I the only one saved? And so she's trying to find out. And this bit is a little bit corny, but she looks in the reflection of her television and sees a figure pointing to her bag and is like, oh yeah, I copied the tape and showed it to him, but he didn't copy the tape and show it to anyone. Okay. And then she's like, oh shit, my son has not copied the tape. Better get him to copy a tape for Granddad. And that is pretty much how the movie ends. So it's like, well, did Granddad see the tape? Did she think, oh, fuck it, I've been a bit negligent with my own son up to this point. Copying a tape is a little bit time consuming. I'll just leave him to it. And you have to watch Ringu 2 to find out the answer to that exciting question. But, I mean, in all seriousness, I do like that we've got an answer, but then we've left the movie with another question. So it's not a happy ending. This is not happy. Whatever decision she makes, somebody is going to die. And the fact that, like, this mystery is basically, it's solved, but it's also unsolvable. This will continue like a ring, you might say. You know, very clever title there. So it's just gonna
no beginning and no end.
Yeah. So, and I do feel that in a sense that is very Japanese. It's like, well, an individual can solve the mystery and they can save themselves, but you can't actually stop it from recurring. This is ongoing.
I almost kind of get the same vibe from It Follows, like how you have to pass the monster to somebody else. I think it's weird that she purposely signed somebody up. Like it wouldn't be as weird to me if she just like left the tape somewhere and like assumed somebody would see it, or like dropped it off randomly to somebody. It's weird to me that she's like, it's going to you, dude.
Not only did she sign someone up, she signed her own fucking father up.
Right? What did this guy do?
There's been no suggestion in the video that her father was abusive towards her, or that they had some sort of grudge. I mean,
or he has a chronic illness or anything.
Yeah. I mean,
he's going to be dead in 2 weeks anyway.
He looked after her son. It's like, oh, thanks for the childcare. Now you're killing me. I mean, like, couldn't she have like given it to like a colleague that is like, oh, they're a bit shit to me, or like, you know, she's got probably not 7 days at this point, but maybe she's got a couple of days. Maybe somebody like, I don't know, doesn't stop at the zebra crossing, and she's like, right, I'm tracking that car, and they're getting the tape now. Or someone's like,
why shouldn't she just get a job at a video store and just make the copies and get them out?
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of people that she could have shown it to. So it is, yeah. I mean, this is a very good film, but there are a few places where we can kind of identify holes or logic gaps, or it just seems a little bit bizarre. I mean, like I say, pointing to the bag that was kind of spoon fed to us. I mean, she could have just worked it out. We didn't need the pointing. And I mean, on that note, something that frustrates me in films and TV series is when it's a little bit condescending and you get a flashback of something that happened that means something else is going to happen. And it's like, yeah, I do remember. I've not got like a memory problem. Like that literally happened 20 minutes ago. And also, if they don't show you and then you figure it out for yourself, you feel good about yourself. You're like, oh yeah, I worked something out. I feel clever. So don't take that moment away from me.
Definitely. I mean, if it still fits the story, I don't think that you have to hand feed it like that at all.
Yeah.
So yeah. So two things. Number one, this would be a very, very different film if she was giving it to somebody who had been abusive, like you said, or somebody who had treated her like crap. We would get like that revenge, almost happy ending. Like, yeah, somebody's got to die, but at least it's that shithead, you know? Mm-hmm. And then also she's going to regret this every single time that she pays for childcare in the future. So, I mean, all of us on here have kids and we know how fast that adds up. So she's making a huge mistake. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I love that comment. I thought we were going to do something like every time she's at a family gathering. No, just childcare. God damn it. But I mean, yeah, It is kind of in keeping with her character that she's just like, oh, I'll just give it to my dad. But if she'd have given it to someone who had actually wronged her, it would be so redemptive.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and also if we'd have got that reveal about how, you know, something shitty happened to her, it would help explain her character flaws and make her a little bit more likable. But no, they weren't going with that at all. I mean, if somehow they'd have given it to Dr. Ikuma, the father of Sadako, that would have been the perfect ending. I mean, he's
Absolutely.
the one who fucking did all this. But no, they weren't going for that.
That was actually my original thought, but then I couldn't remember, like, how long ago was this? Is that dude still alive? You know? So, yeah, I think that it would just, I would like it a lot better. I think it would really wrap things up and it would just leave me with that fuck yeah kind of feeling, you know?
Yeah.
Well, that could be the remake to the remake then.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if they were to remake it now and set it in modern times, I mean, I'm not sure how they do it, because I mean, you can't reasonably set it in modern times and have it be a VHS tape. I mean, if someone sent me a VHS tape, I'd be like, well, I'm not buying a VHS player so that I can see that. In a way, I guess what I was doing with the girl in the video had some similarities in terms of a modern day equivalent, because it starts off with this guy getting like this weird video from a girl, and it's a little bit weird, it's a little bit sexy, it's a little bit disturbing, and at first he thinks, this is just like some junk video that was sent, one of these kind of shitty spam chain things. But then the more time passes, the more he thinks like, okay, was this video actually meant for me? Like, is this personalized? And then things escalate, as they always do, and he's getting more messages, he's getting contact on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Instagram, and he's getting various videos. And yeah, I'm not going to spoil my own story, but he's kind of investigating, okay, what is going on here? And like kind of going back and forth as to whether these videos are specifically meant for him, or if it's just a little bit coincidentally eerie how many things there appear to be in these videos that relate to him and his life. And so if that sounds like the kind of thing that you'd like, if you like fast-paced fiction and you like a little bit of humor, I mean, that's one to check out.
You said it comes out very soon, like
coming out on April the 28th. That'll be the physical book and the ebook. The audio book will be coming soon, although there isn't an exact date for it, because the weird way that it works with Audible is you often submit it to them and then it just appears at some point on Audible.
Yeah, it's
and
whenever they feel like it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you can probably contact them and specify an exact date, but at the moment we're pretty down to the wire. So RJ Bailey has done a fantastic job with the narration, but I'm just going through like the second round of edits at the moment. If that's all good, then I'll probably submit it later today. So we're 10 days out, so it might actually turn up on the 28th. But I mean, if you want this in audio, then either it's out now or it will be a matter of weeks until it's available. And I mean, interesting thing with the audio, so this is being published by Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing, who is headed up by Max Booth III and Laurie Michelle. And so they are putting out the paperback and the ebook, but I actually still have the rights to the audiobook. And so, I mean, I said to them, well, if I've got the rights, I'm going to put it out as an audiobook, because, I mean, I'm a huge fan of audio. I mean, you'd hope so after 340 podcasts. And I mean, I consume a lot of books that way as well. And I kind of feel as well in climate with the popularity of audiobooks, if you're not putting it out, that's potentially leaving money on the table. And I can see why some people wouldn't want to do it for a novella, because competing with novels that are all one Audible credit, people might go for the longer read. But I don't know, the way that I like to consume more books is to have an audio option available. And a lot of the reasons that I kind of do things with This Is Horror and with business is I put out things that I would want. So that's what I'd want, and that's why there's an audio version.
That's great. No, I completely agree. I think that, at the end of the day, if somebody wants to cache their stuff for a longer book or your book, that's still their choice. That's no different than your paperback sitting next to a larger paperback, I think having that choice out there is always better, and I wish that more people would go that route.
Yeah,
I feel a lot of I feel like a lot of authors kind of like are intimidated by it, and it's not that bad at all. I highly encourage anyone who's questioning it to just look into the process. It's really not as bad as you think it is.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I worked with R.J. Bailey to do the audiobook version of Ray Cluley's Water for Drowning, and he did such a good job that I was like, right, that is who I want for my own story. And luckily, he agreed to it. He's really brought it to life. I think he's taken it to the next level with the audio. And I mean, also, like a lot of my stories, it's very dialogue heavy. And I do think that books that are dialogue heavy can translate better to the audio realm.
I agree, yeah. All right, so why don't you tell everybody where they can find you online so that they can follow up with you to find out when the Audible version comes out?
All right, well, on Twitter, you can connect with me at Wilson the Writer. You can also connect via This Is Horror, at This Is Horror. And you can check out my website, michaeldavidwilson.co.uk, as well as thisishorror.co.uk. And I mean, I'm on most social media platforms. I'm on Instagram. I have a Facebook, but I think Twitter is the best place to connect with me. So if you're on that, if you like this episode, connect with me. Send me a message. If there's someone you want me to interview on This Is Horror, let me know. But this has been a pleasure. Thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. It's been great. And I really appreciate that you were able to bring the literal cultural context of being in Japan and just like giving us that background that we wouldn't have otherwise. That's such a great addition to this episode in particular. But I definitely can't wait to have you back and do something else very soon.
Yeah, definitely. Be a pleasure.
That wraps it up for this week. As always, I am James Sabata.
And I'm Don Guillory.
And we'll see you back here at thenecronama.com in only 7 more days. 7 days.
7 days. 7